giving it a little bit of time while people log in. I see we've got a lot of people have joined early and a few extras coming in now. So, yeah, just want to start by saying good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's webinar. It's the first of a series under the Smarter Debt, Better Profit banner. So today we're focused on measuring productivity and profit. My name is Daniel Elder and I'll be hosting today. Just a quick note that today's session will be recorded, so any questions and comments will become publicly available. Today is meant to be informative and educational, so no advice will be provided. Q&A is at the end, so please place any questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and yeah, we'll try to answer those later. Now, John, can I just get you please to start the presentation again? I just can't see it popped up, sorry. Video. Sorry, everyone, just presentations just dropped off and we'll try and pick that up. Everyone's still dialing in, so hopefully that all goes well. Appears to be coming up now. Great. Thanks for that, John. Cool. So in the essence of time, we have a basic two-speaker agenda. So I just want to set the scene by providing you some background as to why we're moving in this space and the importance. And then we're going to hand over to our economist, John Gillespie, to take you through some of the ideas and concepts. And also our intent is to stay high level, and pending your feedback, we'll try and shape some specialised content for the future series. So a quick intro with QRIDA. So for those who don't know us, we're a statutory authority, and so we provide specialist services to the Queensland Government. Many of you are aware of the concessional loans and grants we provide throughout Queensland, during our disaster seasons. But also we have 11 regional area managers. So if today triggers any sort of thoughts around investment or expansion, please feel free to reach out and, speak to one of those guys. So also we do have some upcoming events throughout Queensland, as you can see. So if you do get the opportunity, please go and say good day to them. They're quite friendly, and let them know I sent you. So why measurement? As many of you are aware, agriculture comes with high amounts of risk and reward. So the impacts of market fluctuations, seasonal variability, government legislation and global competition is compound when you consider the continual debt-based expansion that we've seen. So in the recent September trends in farm debt by ABARES, total real debt in Australia grew from 123 billion to 131 billion. So you can sort of see that there's been a significant growth there, but one of the interesting points that we see is that loans outstanding to primary producers grew from 21.8 billion from the financial year 16-17 to 32.7 billion in the 23-24 financial year. So even though we sit at the highest debt, we also sit at the lowest number of loans outstanding over 90 days. So back in FY 2016-2017, this was actually, of those that are outstanding greater than 90 days, it was 92%. But when you bring it to today or the end of FY 23-24, this has dropped back to 37%. So you can see that there is a really good change in those debt figures. But yeah, so I suppose, given the growth, it's very important to understand what we're doing and how to address that. So I suppose the concept comes down, why is this so important to me? So I always see this every day in my role with QRIDA, managing the Farm Debt Restructure Office. So we, alongside other support services, assist clients identify and hopefully address financial problems. So through the farm business analysis process, we engage third-party specialists in the accounting and restructuring fields to review, forecast, and hopefully plan the next steps for farmers' businesses. So when it comes to delivering the greatest value here, the quote from Peter Drucker sums it up the best. You can't manage what you don't measure. So if you're interested in further information regarding the program, please reach out. My contact details will be available at the end of this presentation. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our main speaker, QRIDA economist John Gillespie. John has over 40 years in business ownership and management spanning agriculture, heavy earth moving manufacturing, engineering, rural financial counselling, and government. He holds a master's in agribusiness and economics and has developed a suite of material focused to improve business management, decision making, productivity, and risk. So without further ado, John, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the kind words. And look, welcome everybody. It's great that this is a start of our Smarter Debt, Better Profit series, and hopefully people will log in and sort of follow us through the whole of the series. Because one thing about improving performance, unless you understand where your baseline is, then it's really, really difficult to find a direction. As Dan mentioned before, you have to have a measurement to be able to improve. Now, productivity, if you improve productivity improvement automatically means more profit, because productivity effectively is the amount of output, in other words, dollars and cents, that we get from the amount of input that we put in place. So obviously the less cost or the more output we have, the greater the production and profits of our business. So it's really important that we understand. But to get started, we have to understand that we're starting with a measurement. So we have to understand what our baseline is. I'm a great believer of this guy. Filippo Pareto is an Italian economist back in the late 1800s. And he did a lot of work in working how to measure and manage your performance. And what he basically said, 80% of your profit or 80% of the business improvement comes from 20% of your effort. 80% of your effort produces 20% of your profit. So effectively sitting down and measuring your business is the 20%. I'll never forget an uncle of mine told me, Johnny, you should always spend 1 day a week in the office, because that's the way you're working on the business, not in it. So at that time, I didn't know about this guy. And when I looked at the numbers, that was the 1 day he was talking about, which is 20% of the time we work on the business rather than in it. So effectively, what we're doing when we start developing a measurement strategy, we're doing the 20%. So I've already spoke about what is productivity. So why do we analyse it? Because if we can improve productivity, we're effectively making more money. There's no doubt about that. I've worked with a number of businesses over the last 15 or 20 years. And as they look at their business and delve into it, I've seen some businesses reduce their costs by 20%. I was working with one last year, and we improved their gross profit by about 8 or 9%, just by looking at how the business operates. So it's really important. So unless we analyse it, we don't know where we're at, and we don't know how we can improve. So the really interesting thing here, those of you who are familiar with Grazing for Profit and the Resource Council in Queensland, look for Stan Parsons. I had an argument with him one day, and he said there's only 3 ways to make more money. You increase your sales, you reduce your overheads, or you improve your gross profit or your gross margin. Now, it's really important here that we understand the terminology that I'm using. Overheads quite often are referred to as fixed or indirect or operating costs. And these are costs that don't change regardless of the shift in your production. So effectively things like telephone, those sorts of things. It doesn't matter how much you produce or how many hectares you farm, you're only going to have a certain level of telephone costs. Direct cost, I use direct costs because I quite often get confused about where direct costs are. Now, in most of your accounting packages, it'll say cost of goods sold. Sometimes it's called variable cost. And these are things like fertilizers, contract labor, seed, water. So for every hectare that you increase, you're going to have an increase in that cost. So that's the way I look at it. So any of those costs that increase proportionally to what you produce, they're what I call direct costs. And I'll refer to these through the whole of the presentation. So yeah, it comes back to the only way to make more money, increase sales. That can be quite difficult at times. However, I say if you improve your genetics or improve your performance, you can increase the production, which will, of course, increase your sales. Reduce your overheads. That's a really important one. So this is where you delve into the business, say, do I need that new car or do I need that new tractor? Can the one that I've got now last for another couple of years? And obviously, improve your gross margins. This comes back to how efficiently do you use your inputs? And that's labour, fertilisers, blick slips and drenches and those sorts of things. Can you improve the output relative to the cost of those inputs? So in terms of productivity measures, and as I said, productivity effectively is the cost of your inputs relative to the output that's produced in terms of dollars. So your inputs are things like money, materials, and labour. Depending upon what industry you're in, this will change around the level or the percentage of that either money, labour, or materials relative to your sales. But most of them, material costs and labour costs are quite high. So therefore, they're the costs that you have to bear. So they're your input costs. And your inputs are things like area, sunlight, those sorts of things are input as well, but I won't go there. I'll have a discussion with some people at a later date if you want it. And these inputs are converted into outputs. Now, outputs are revenue, that's a dollar sign, and revenue equates to production. So it's kilos per hectare, yield per beast, those sorts of things. So that's what you're trying to produce. And it comes from the inputs that you actually have to put into the animals or into the farm to produce that output. So we talk about productivity or efficiency measures. We talk about capital efficiency. That's the money or the assets that you have sitting in your business. How are you performing in terms of profits relative to capital efficiency? Quite often this can be return on investment or return on equity or return on assets. Labour productivity. Labour productivity is really important because labour productivity means that effectively that you're getting more output per every dollar of labour that you put in place. In some industries, energy efficiency is really important as well. So that's again the same as labour. What's your revenue you get from each dollar input? The other one, which is operational material efficiency, and that comes back to those direct costs. They're those costs which are related directly to the production. And if you reduce those costs in terms of performance, then you will improve the efficiency. Process efficiency looks at how do you manage the activities that you do in your business. I'll give you an example of that. A number of years ago, we ran 20-odd thousand sheep in Western Queensland. One of the biggest bugbears we had, with most of us who know wool, is the fact that blowflies are a real problem. Now, blowflies are a pain in the backside because not only do they reduce your wool value, but they also kill your sheep. Now, hand jetting, 2 people, 800 a day. We worked with an automatic jet. We bought about 3 or 4 of them. And yes, they improved the throughput of our sheep, but it didn't necessarily get the right amount of fluid on each sheep because some went through really quickly and some got stuck and got absolutely saturated. So I patented a machine which allowed us to put through 1,000 an hour and put on exactly the same amount of water for every sheep. Now that's process efficiency. It's a process. So you're actually putting sheep into a race, putting water on them and putting them out. So we improved the process by inventing a machine which allows us to do it more effectively. The last one is environmental sustainability. And again, it's all about how do you improve your land and your environment. Remembering that if we degrade our land, then we are going to reduce the production on that every acre that we have. So it's really important we understand about environmental sustainability, and that comes back to efficiency of that asset. To do all this sort of information or gather all this information, we need data, and data is critical. We have a lot of information at our fingertips. The most important one and the easiest to get access to is our financial accounts. We're obliged through the tax office to complete our BAS statement, fill out our forms every 3 months. That then means that we have access to really good data on our performance relative to our sales, our cost of direct cost, and our overheads. The other one we have a really good handle on is our sales numbers or the production data. So it's a number of head, kilos, or that sort of thing. And our production data looks at your kilos per hectare, because if we harvest, say, 1,000 hectares and we produce 1,000 tonnes, we know there's one tonne per hectare. So we've got really good data on that. And we have to have that data, because when we sell product, we get that back through our invoices. The other one is resource use efficiency and labour per hours of input or output. Time to cultivate an area, but one that I always found really interesting when we were out west, because we had a bulldozer, we did some earth moving, but I had to move my crawler from one end of the place to the other, which is 20 miles away. Now, it takes about 6 hours to walk a caterpillar from one end of the place to the other. Now, in terms of process, I would take a day to go down and do a job and a day to walk the machine home. If I sat down and planned my day, I'd walk the dozer out there, do the job, and find other jobs to work on the way home. So effectively, I was making better use of my labour rather than spending time driving the dozer to and from a point and costing me a day's labour in that actually just travelling, and you're not actually doing anything. The other one is around rework non-conformance, making sure that your quality of your product is important. So you don't want to produce a product that doesn't meet your customers' requirements. Quite often as producers, we do tend to see ourselves as producers, and the product, when it leaves the farm gate, that's not up to us anymore. But if our customers don't want it, we're going to get a lower price. So it's really important that we understand the relationship between quality and price. And that comes back to that rework or non-conformance. So that comes back to the information we can gather. There are a number of external sources of data, such as the Australian Bureau of Statistics, RBA. They can give you international information on exchange rates, what's happening overseas, what the Americans are doing in terms of consuming beef, or how many cows Brazil are producing. Of course, there are private consultants and banks. They offer information. Private consultants usually have a benchmarking process, and we'll go through one, but as we go through the next few slides. But there's a number of benchmarking consultants out there. And as I said before, it's really important that when you benchmark yourself against your peers as well as internally. So when I talk about benchmarking, there's two parts of benchmarking. One is your internal benchmark over time, and that's your data, and that's the most accurate that you have. When you benchmark yourself with your peers, in other words, that's your competitors, it's not necessarily comparing apples with apples, because they might call something slightly differently, which means that when you start doing your analytics, it doesn't actually show what is really happening to your business or your comparison. So always take benchmark peer to peer with a little bit of grain of salt, but it also gives you some direction to say, well, am I being competitive against my competitors, or am I doing really well and I might rest on my laurels? But if you rest on your laurels, you're still going to run into trouble as well. So they're the interesting or main sources of your data. So usually your data is reported in a number of ways. Most of them reported as Excel tables, and most of them don't like tables because they're just numbers and they just sort of all fall together. MLA and DPI, Data Farm, present the data in a dashboard form, and those are really good places to go to see where numbers or where your products are being sold, how it's being sold, and farm performance. Obviously, your internal financial statements, they're really important. And I would suggest, I know when I was working for a 1,500 sow piggery in Armidale, where I was contracted to do the production and business management, I used to do the financials every 2 weeks. So I've got to monitor the receipts and costs so that I could talk to the owners and tell them exactly how we're performing. So every 2 weeks, I would go in and do a bank reconciliation so that I could come out and say, this is how we're performing, and give them the data and chart it. The other one is around your key performance information. Quite often that comes in as invoices or statements of accounts, and you can tabulate that and put it into an Excel spreadsheet and give you some information. The last one is chart. I love charts because charts over time can show trends, or charts compared to your peers show where you're sitting within your peers. Charts are probably the most useful tool that you have available to yourself to determine how you're performing. And the really important part is numbers mean nothing unless they're analysed. Now, I've worked with businesses in the past. To give you an example, I was doing some analytics on a production system. They had 97 columns of data. Me to analyse the business, I only needed 3. So all the information that they'd put in, which takes time to do, they didn't need all the information, or I didn't need it. So why were they entering it? That cost an admin person, that's an overhead. It increases the cost of production. So it's really important that you look at your data and use it effectively. So why do we need these numbers? The first one, as I said before, to determine our performance. This allows us then to look at a baseline or a benchmark and identify what we can improve and how we can improve it, but also allows us to compare ourselves to our peers. It gives us that competitive advantage. And that's really important from a business perspective, because we're in a highly competitive world and it's very cutthroat out there. We're being pressured by imports from overseas. A significant amount of Australian food comes in from overseas, which is really scary. So we have to be the best at what we do. When we do the numbers, there are 4 ones that I really think are worthwhile. One is your direct costs. The other one is your overheads. The third one is net profit. So in other words, what's your profit relative to your, in terms of all your cost added minus your revenues. And the last one is your return on your investment. That's your equity. Remember I said about return on or capital productivity? This is where capital productivity can be shown. So yeah, your cost of sales, direct cost, is as a percent of sales, because as I said before, I like to use percentage as opposed to numbers. So, and sales revenue, overheads is overheads divided by sales. Net profit basically is the net profit divided by sales. And then the last one is the return on investment. And I'll show you just a little bit in the next couple of slides about how you can represent or present those. This is a table that anybody can develop. It actually comes out of Excel. So the first side is on the left is a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. The only data that you need to put in, and this makes it really simple for people, is your gross sales. Now, if you're doing some analytics, then I would break sales up into your enterprises. So if you're a summer crop, winter crop, a perennial crop, livestock, I would break them up into each of those line items. And again, for your direct costs, I'd break them up into the cost for crop 1, cost for crop 2, cost for livestock and whatever. Your overhead, total overheads. You don't need to worry about units or that sold, because that's more associated with if you're on a single enterprise, such as cattle or sheep or cropping. But the next one down there is total assets and total liabilities. This allows you then to report to the right-hand side, which is a gross profit. Now that should be 192,000, not 19210. That's a gross profit of 59%. Cost of sales is 40.8%, and your overheads are 51.08%. That gives you a gross profit per unit of $7, or you can actually do that as a total value. But the important part about it is it gives you a net profit of 8.11%. Unless you know that data, unless you're putting it in and analysing it, you're not going to get the result that you're after. And it's really important that you understand that. Now, the last line item is your return on equity. This comes back to the amount of money that you have equity within your business, in other words, assets minus liabilities. And this gives you the amount of money that you're returning on your investment. So that's 47%. Now, this sort of table is really easy to set up. You don't have to do it in your financial package, but you can extract it out. I would encourage people to do what looks like the next one, to set up a spreadsheet that looks a little bit like this. If it's not in your chart of accounts in your financial package, do it externally and export it and create these, because this allows you then to look at a crop 1, your direct cost in crop 1, and again, crop 2, your direct costs and livestock, and so on. Then it allows you then to determine which one of your enterprises is actually performing. I used to do a lot of work, this sort of work down in Armidale, where I worked with a business that had up to 8 enterprises. And I work through with them to say which one they should keep and which one they should drop. Because some of them were performing much better than others, and some of them would be performing much better or not as good, but the type of land that they had only allowed them to do a certain enterprise. So you couldn't actually drop one enterprise because the land would not allow it to happen, which is a bit unfortunate. But it allows you, in one of the next sessions we're going to talk about it, I'll show you some tools which enable you to get through and look at how to measure that and improve it. You know what I said about benchmarking? This is a benchmarking company, and as you can see there, this is gross profit back there on the farm, and this goes back to the year before. So you can see a bit of a change. But what's really important here, this is the average. What's really important is the best of the businesses are earning nearly double what this particular business is in gross profit per hectare. It's nearly double. Now, there might be reasons for that. It could be rainfall, it could be the type of soil, it could be the location, but it does show that there's a fair movement to require for that to get to there. And this is where it becomes really important. So unless you know this, you don't know that you can do better. That's why benchmarking and analysing your business and getting the data and looking at your performance so that you can actually do this. If you can't do it, well then you're basically running blind. And as the old saying goes, to start a journey you have to have a start point, but you have to have an end point. And end points are very much around planning. You do your budgets, you have a 5, 6, 8, 10-year plan. This is where I want to be. So this person might say, well, we're at $645 per hectare. I want to get to $1,000 in 10 years' time. That might mean a whole host of different investments that you require. This is where coming and talking to QRIDA can help. We might be able to assist you with saying, well, I need some money to do this. There's an opportunity here. And to invest in improvement and productivity, that's where this sort of scenario can happen. Again, these are the data here, that's your overheads. And here, look at the cost. Their costs are slightly higher, so it's probably they might use more fertilizer, or they might be slightly bigger. And here again, net profit per hectare, it's slightly different. These guys are a lot bigger, a lot more. So again, once you understand where your business is, you can actually go and benchmark against your peers, and that helps performance. So the really important takeout message from this one here, we saw the numbers before. Effectively, there's about a 12% difference between the best and the worst from a gross profit percent perspective for a gross margin, and the same about your overheads. There's about so effectively that says 24% difference between the best and the worst. What I say to people, you need to be in the top 20%, because financial pressures, droughts, competitive pressures will push those people who are earning at the bottom end, 34% of their cost of sales. This guy's 23%. Those ones that are a lot higher are going to suffer pressure, financial pressure, much sooner than a business that's in the top 20%. Now, this effectively says that this margin here, that's where the top 20% is. If you want to talk to somebody, then we can have that conversation, but certainly talk to your financial advisor, your business consultant, say, work with them to improve. The reason why I use percent, this chart here effectively says, well, yes, this one here is gross margin in terms of dollars. This one here is gross margin in terms of percent. The reason why I say we want to look at percent rather than dollars is there is a variation. And I would suggest that if you're going to look at performance over time, use percent rather than dollars, because there's always changes in value, but you need to look at the percent. It's more important from a time series perspective than looking at the dollar value, because if you're looking at a 10-year time frame, then we've seen that the change in price of grain, cattle, sugar, that fluctuates, but also increases over time. Why competitiveness? The world as we know it, high input cost, ongoing trade disruptions. To see this environment, it's important to have an effective strategy. The strategic plan and the business plan is really important, so you understand where we're going. If we do this well, it'll reduce our risk, but also if we do it really well, it'll improve our productivity, lower costs, and enhance our overall profit margins. So the question, if you want to be competitive, we need to work more productively to improve our competitiveness, local supply chains, cost management and efficiency. There will be a trade-off between employment and once we head towards improving productivity, because once we head towards automation and process efficiency, then that labour cost will reduce. There's no two ways about that. So, any questions? I'll hand it over to you, Dan, if you want to
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Yeah, so it's time now. If you've got any sort of questions to highlight, that'd be fantastic. I think I do have one here ready to go, but I will just slip through the last slides, and we do have a survey at the end, which I'll get a QR code for you as well. But there's a quick picture of ourselves. So I'm based in southern Queensland. Claudia's up in North Queensland, and John is based in the southeast in Brisbane. So yeah, if you want to catch up with us, you should get a copy of these slides. So yeah, please feel free to get our details from there. I'll just leave the survey code up during the Q&A. But John, you've covered a fair level of complexity pretty quickly. How do we, what's the simplest way to start this journey from a producer's point of view?
As I always say, the simplest process or the simplest starting point is get your financial statement. Do the numbers. So because we already have all that data, we already have the cost of direct cost associated with our production. We already have our overheads. We already have a whole host of information around our business in terms of our financial performance, and ultimately productivity is around improving profits. So the profit or the dollar data that we have, which is in our financial statements, is the first starting point that I always say to people. Go to your financials, have a look at them, extract the information out, and then once you get the information in terms of sales revenue, your cost of production, your overheads, then you can start saying, okay, well, then you can start going back to enhancing or improving your data gathering capability in the business. For example, when I was out west, we farmed as well. We farmed about 2,000 acres. I would record every gallon of fuel that went into our tractor when we were farming every morning, and then when I come back, I would record every single gallon that we used on that particular paddock. So that way, then that was fuel usage for the crop. So I knew then how much fuel we used. I knew how many hours we were operating. I knew how much seed we had, how much fertilizer we used, and then once we had the sales, once you harvested it, we can work out how many tons we produced per hectare, and that gave us a whole heap of data on what it cost us to actually produce a tonne of grain, and also what it cost us to produce per hectare. And that's when you can start gathering data. And it's really important that once you start understanding your profits, then you can say, well, can we do better? And if you start at that point, that's the first one, because internal data analysis is more important than the external, because you have control over everything you do, and you also have control of every piece of information that you gather, and it's not corrupted by some person's thought of what it should be.
That's cool. John, I've just got some extra questions coming in now too. You've been working on some benchmarking stuff internally, but the first question here, does QRIDA have any benchmarking data that can be used to compare against clients' data?
Not really at this stage. We are working on it at the moment. I know that there is the potential for the data gathering, because again, once you start gathering information and benchmarking, the really important part of that is gathering all the information. And a good example is we can sort of do a time series analysis or benchmark over time, but we have changes in say crop performance, but the things like that we don't have, things like rainfall. Now, rainfall have a big impact on both our cattle production or our livestock production and our crop production. But when we do the benchmark over time, that's not measured, so I can't refer back to rainfall and say, well, this is the reason why this particular year things didn't perform well. So when you start looking at comparing, you really do need the benchmarking across gather all the data, and includes everything that might impact upon your production. We don't have that at the moment. We are sort of progressing, and hopefully that's something that we might be able to work in the future.
There's another question here. It sort of leads on from that. Just a person mentioned, do you have spreadsheets in Excel that can populate with our data?
I do have. So we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
I've created a lot of Excel spreadsheets for population just for this sort of purpose. So that it's just like that one we showed in the presentation. That's one that I had created, that all people had to do was put the numbers in. And they're really easy to create. And it's just a case of this is what it is. There's also a range of spreadsheets which you can get hold of, which allows you to, and I think there's some of your other access to, say, the meat and livestock. Some of your consultants will have spreadsheets which you can use to do that sort of thing, and that have that conversation. But I know that I'm not sure whether DPI still have them. They used to have those spreadsheets available.
Cool. So maybe on that one, Prue, you could probably reach out to us direct after as well, and we might be able to give a bit more direction there. Another question, John. Is there anyone you'd recommend in cropping around benchmarking? This is probably a bit of a tricky one for us to make recommendations on.
It is a really tricky one. But look, what I suggest to people when they're looking at, especially cropping, there's a fair bit of data around. Well, there's a lot of consultants out there who do cropping and also livestock. But from a cropping perspective, the really important one that I see is you should always start looking at gathering your data over time, because as I said before, the most important data that you have is yours. And I always say that if this is what it looks like, and you can go on to say ABARES site, our data farm, and they will give you some information on the average cost of production, the average yields, those sorts of things. From a government perspective, it's a little bit out of date, but it can give you an idea of what it might look like. So you can do some many, and look, I can see if I can find some. If anybody's interested, I can send you some links that might help, that will allow you to do some analytics, because ABARES does it across the whole of Australia. Data Farm does it just in Queensland. So you can actually look at some of that information and give you an idea of what some of the industries are. The unfortunate part about that is it's bulked together. So rather than look at, say, a cane farm or a banana farm or a cattle producer or a grain farm or a cotton grower, we don't have that ability to identify that out. It'll just say broadacre or horticulture. So we can't differentiate between the businesses, which is a bit unfortunate.
Cool. I've got another question, just going on from that. Is there any data about machinery ownership versus contracting, or info about when you might be over-investing in machinery?
That's a good question. So look, if you're looking at analytics, what you need to do, there's a number of packages out there that allow you to download an Excel spreadsheet, which is basically a calculator, a mortgage or a lease calculator. So you can look at it and say, okay, well, this is a lease or a mortgage, and then you can work out what it costs you to actually own the machine. So it's fairly easy then to look at your depreciation cost or your lease cost and add that to fuel and maintenance. And generally speaking, maintenance of machinery is about 15% of fuel costs. That's a rule of thumb type thing. It's not exactly 100%, but generally around 15% of fuel costs. So when you put that together, you've got your lease cost, you've got your mortgage cost if you're borrowing money. Then you can compare it with your fuel costs, and then your maintenance cost, and then say, okay, well, what is it? Well, if I'm contracting somebody, you also need to include labour into that. So what is it in terms of the labour and the contract cost? And that's relatively easy to set up in a spreadsheet. You can sort of say, okay, well, what's the overall cost? I've done that for some businesses in the past, where we looked at what it would be in terms of compared machinery.
John, I might just make a comment too about recommending people and pointing people in the right direction. Because I manage a panel of consultants, and what I find is half the battle is finding someone you can work with and gel with. And so one big like we could definitely there's a lot of resources and people available. We could definitely point you in direction, but it's probably having a conversation about where you're at and what you need. And that probably leads to my second point is depending on where you're at, because with the farm business analysis, if we get clients come in and they haven't completed the last 3 years financials, then really the consultant they need isn't a consultant, it's a bookkeeper and accountant. And so trying to get people onto that journey and then understand, look, is it production based? Do we need to send them back to like an extension officer for horticulture or beef? Or is it more in the business analytics? So that's where I'd say definitely, reaching out to us direct, and we can have a chat about some of those questions.
Oh, look, most definitely. It's really important that one of the things that I always look at, and this comes from experience working with businesses. The successful businesses generally have at least 3 or 4 people that they, in their circle of advisors or support, have at least three to 4 professionals. There will always be their accountant. There will most likely be their legal advisor. There will, in all probability, be their a business analyst, and quite often there'll be some form of either professional services, as in a consultant of some form. Now, they're the most successful business that I've seen over time. That tends to be the people that they get to congregate around them. So they provide tax advice, they provide technical advice on their production, they provide some form of business analytics, such as what I do as an economist and a business analyst. And the other thing that I do say is go to field days and talk to people who have information available to them, see someone might be trying to sell you a piece of machinery. Well, they might give you a whole heap of data on what it can do. Well, look at that and see what other people's machinery does as well. So gather people around you that have an understanding of what you need, and remember that quite often one person doesn't necessarily hold all the key to your business. It's worthwhile going out and finding the right people to do it, because they have the skills that is quite specific and quite technical and quite focused.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, John. No, I definitely find that in my role, where the more people the more information, the better rounded perspective they can have, especially when there's financial difficulties. That leads on to another question we've got here. If we are not in financial difficulties, are we still able to access the kinds of help QRIDA provides? I might just answer that one, John. Definitely. Depending on what you're looking for, like our general loans and grant space, we're looking to help primary production in Queensland, so improve productivity, growth, and things like that. When it comes to my program, the farm business analysis, definitely looking to try and help people in financial difficulty, and that doesn't mean that you're in default. That just means you might have got into the floods like they had in the northwest, or you might have lost a key family member and things like that. And the future outlook's looking pretty grim. So more than happy to have a chat. But yeah, definitely. Our general programs, we're looking to actually improve productivity and assist primary producers' sustainability in Queensland. I can't see any more questions, so I'll probably just give everyone a few more seconds to, please grab your camera and grab that QR code and complete the survey, because it'll help us shape the next coming webinars. But I just really want to thank everyone who joined us and also the questions. And again, I just want to just put that offer out there. If there's anything you want to cover, we'd be more than happy to speak with you individually and see if we can help. And maybe just one last one coming up here. that I can see coming through. How does the lease loan generally work with QRIDA? In regards to leases, Danica, we don't do those. It's just mainly your general mortgage lending when it comes to fixed assets. So, but what I would say is you're probably best to reach out to one of our regional area managers in your area. So I'm not exactly where you are, but definitely jump on our website, whack in your postcode, and one of the regional area managers will be able to have a more in-depth discussion about what they might be able to do as well. Just one last question: how often are the webinars going to be held? That'll be to be determined, and how we go. So we've definitely got 2 more that we are looking to provide. But depending on the feedback, we might be able to go to a little bit more depth or specialise on a few. So that's great.
Look, one thing, as Dan just said, look, in the questionnaire or in the feedback sheet, there are some tick boxes there what you have an interest in. And please, look, if you think you need to delve more into a certain topic, I know that I've done this for probably 15 or 20 years. What we find is that one sort of webinar or workshop will fall into another one. Because people want more information on a certain topic, which we didn't cover as a general, and this is very much a generalised topic. There's each of those slides that we covered. I've got webinars set up for in a previous role for each one of those. So it's a full webinar, full half an hour on say looking at the bell curve and how people perform and what they need to know. Another one set up on internal and external benchmarking. So it depends upon what you provide back to us in terms of the information that you want. But certainly one thing that I cannot reiterate more is that until you know what your base data is, then it's really difficult then to change and improve performance. So gather as much information as you can. You've got my contact details there. If you have an interest in saying, well, what sort of information do I need? Well, you can certainly reach out and have a yarn with me around some of the data needs from a analytic perspective, because I've got a whole suite of econometric and statistical analysis tools which I use to provide and get results to show performance. Some was just around, and to give you a good example, I did some work with a business on import-export, and they imported a lot of their material from overseas. They had really good profit margins, but because when we looked at the profitability of the business and how it was linked to the export market, any change in the exchange rate had a significant impact upon their profit margin. So we need to look internally as well as externally when we're looking at data. That's why I had some of those links there to, or some of those identifiers as to look at international markets, look at international databases, because they impact very heavily upon our performance. A good example of that, and it's something that looking at the beef industry, we've got 28 million cattle heading up to or around about there. Brazil has 248 million cattle. They kill more than we grow. So if they want to move into any of our markets, we're going to really struggle to compete. That's why it's always important from our perspective, we have to be a least cost producer. And that comes back to be a least cost producer, you have to know what your cost is to start with. So hence the reason why you need to know how much it costs you per cow, how much it costs you per kilo, and what does it cost per hectare. That's the sort of information that's really important from a productivity moving forward perspective, but you need to know your baseline before you can start making change.
Cool. Thanks, John. Just that little bit of confirmation in the background around equipment. So yeah, we'll definitely do lending for equipment. But yeah, in regards to the arrangement, whether it be a lease and things like that, definitely best to chat with the RAM on the specifics around what QRIDA will take in regards to that. So I just wanted to clarify that, just so people didn't get the misunderstanding in what we do.
Any more questions? Because we've got a few minutes to go. So if you've got
I think we're pretty good at that, John. So I'm actually really happy with that. So I might just close it out, but I would just again want to thank everyone for attending. Thanks for the questions, and yeah, definitely reach out if you've got anything more to cover. So at the end, thank you, and we'll roll off. See ya.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your attendance and for the questions. Great.